Charlie, it's very good to see you again. I don't know if you remember, but we actually met at the Planet Hollywood party a few months ago. So it's really nice to get to actually visit with you when it's not a big crowd around.
Yeah, no, that's great. I do remember.
So I wanted to talk to you. Obviously, we're talking about the hoverboard, but I want to back up a little bit and sort of talk about your career and your relationship with Michael. Because obviously half the proceeds from the auction of the hoverboard from Back to the Future 2 are going to go to the Michael J. Fox Foundation for Parkinson's Research. And you and Michael have a very, very long relationship. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, you worked with Michael on a number of films, including ones that one would not normally assume had a stunt person. Secret of My Success, Bright Lights, Big City. You and Michael go back a really long way. So I'd like to sort of begin at the genesis of your relationship, because obviously you've been doing this a very long time, being a stuntman and a stunt coordinator and a director and all the other things that you've done throughout your illustrious career. But obviously you and Michael have a very deep and meaningful relationship. When did you guys first meet?
Mike and I first met on the set of Back to the Future. I had moved from New York, where I started doing stunts, and come to California to pursue stunts after having done a job here for Suzuki. I thought, wow, I met everybody in the industry, and they all said, wow, there's nobody your size out here. You should be here. You'd never stop working. So you used to go around to all of the studios and get your hands on all the call sheets for that particular day, and then visit sets. And, it was called hustling. That's how you would get your job. You'd go introduce yourself to a stunt coordinator. And there was one person that a friend of mine had mentioned before I left Connecticut. I actually grew up in Connecticut. That if I ever came across this person, to let them know, because, they were curious what he was doing and how he was doing. And this one day, it was 30 days after I arrived in California, that I was at Universal Studios. And there was a girl there that used to let us into the room. We'd kind of sneak in the back way. And in there, this back room was where all of the call sheets were. But this one day, there was one call sheet on the counter, and it was Back to the Future. And this guy's name was on that call sheet. So I said, well, that's that guy. I have to go find him. So asked her where this location was, which was on the back lot at Universal. And I headed out to the back lot. And then when I arrived on set, which was the town square, I asked an AD where this guy was. And he happened to be the stunt coordinator on the show. And they pointed him out. And as I was walking up to him, Mike walked out of the stage, and we both walked side by side right up to this guy. And he asked this guy if I was going to be his stunt double. And the guy looked at him, guy looked at me, and he said, yeah. And that was it. That was the beginning of it. And I've doubled Michael for 16 years from that point. All the Back to the Futures and everything we did up until Spin City, and even some stuff on Spin City. So yeah, I've been friends with Mike for 40 years.
So when you guys, obviously it's a very fortuitous meeting in that regard, you guys walking out together. When did you begin the relationship? Because obviously, what I know from my limited experience with actors and stunt guys is the fact that you actually form a pretty symbiotic relationship, that it becomes that the actor realizes that you are there to keep them out of harm's way. And that becomes a meaningful part of that relationship.
Right. So, it was instantaneous with Mike. He was just cool as cool can be. I ended up staying that day and running over the top of the car, Biff pushing me backwards on the skateboard. And so, my interaction with Mike was Mike is a very physically capable guy, and tough as nails. And he wanted to be involved in as much stuff as possible. Granted, we have to keep him from getting hurt. So there's only so many things, but it was that day that we hung out, we did what we needed to do. And it just kind of, it was the smoothest process. I mean, nothing was ever forced. He and I were just friends. You know, it's one of those things, you meet someone and you just immediately click. We both moved very similarly. We approached things, you know, the same way. We were a little competitive with each other.
How so?
And it was just one of those things where you're like, you know, instant friends.
When you say competitive with each other, how do you mean?
Well, he always wanted to do more than he should, and oftentimes we let him do more than he should. You know, as long as it was safe. We had to. My role with him was not only performing stunts that were too dangerous for him to do, that he could potentially get hurt or killed, but also to help him be able to perform these stunts. And you know, him being such a physically capable guy, it was, and we were both about the same age. We were both had the same, you know, had our activities, our physical activities were very much the same. So it was the kind of thing where nothing was forced. You know, I would test things for him. We would then bring him out and I would talk to him about it. And this is what you have to do. And don't do this and don't do that. And, but you can go this far and so on. And, you know, we just kind of, it was extremely smooth. It was never like, Mike, you know, there were times when Mike said, you know what, you got it. You can do this, because it's just a little bit much, but, oftentimes it was like, I need to kind of pull you back a little bit, Mike. You know, this could hurt you. And we've put these things in place to prevent you from getting hurt. But at the same time, it's not perfect science. So, and it was just extremely easy to deal with him. You know, I don't know how to explain it anymore. It was just like two people that knew each other, understood each other, and I understood what he wanted to be able to do, and I think he understood what those things that I needed to do, and it just kind of flowed. You know,
if I'm not mistaken, he's the actor with whom you have had the longest relationship, right? I mean, that is. Certainly your filmography is significant, substantial. The actors with whom you've worked, the directors with whom you've worked are all certainly people that we're well aware of. I think you did Face Off. I know you've worked with Harrison Ford. There have been any number of actors that are household names. But I don't know that I can point to any of them and say, well, that's somebody with whom you've had a significant and long-lasting friendship and relationship.
Well, you know, that's, yeah. So I had started doing stunts in New York 4 years prior to meeting Mike. And when I met Mike,
you have a trauma?
Yeah, Trona.
With Lloyd Kaufman?
Yeah. And Michael Hers, I believe, was one of the producers as well. Yeah, I mean, there were several films that I worked on in New York City. And at the time, you know, you're young, you're dumb, you're just pursuing something. But with Mike, you know, Mike was the catalyst for my career. So 4 years you're doing whatever you can do to get into the industry. But once I met Mike, my trajectory was set. If not for him, and not only the catalyst for my career, for a very successful career, but my life. Because of Mike, I was in a position to, you know, continue with other shows, with other people, you know, advance through the system, right. From stunt double or stunt man to stunt coordinator to second unit director, and on. So really, when it comes down to it, my entire career I owe it to Mike.
Is this something you communicate with him? Does he know that? I mean, Michael certainly knows the impact of his relationship with you and your relationship with him. You know, it fascinates me because I think the perception of a stuntman is that you are, and certainly we all have different ideas of what that means, whether it's from watching a film like The Stuntman or The Fall Guy or things like this, where we sort of have at least a perception of what the relationship is, especially where it's a long time relationship. But you always sort of wonder, is it a friendship? Is it, you know, because this guy is trusting you to put your life in your hands on his behalf.
Yeah. I have talked to Mike about it. I've told him, he knows what he's done for me, and in turn my family. I think he understands. I mean, I have an enormous amount of respect for the man. He is a good person. He's an amazing human being, and I've told him, I mean, just when we talk to each other, when we see each other, it's just kind of two friends talking to each other. I've told him that he is he's what made my whole life come together. I mean, but he doesn't, he's just like, yeah, it's not a big deal.
Right.
It just is what it is. And that's what's so cool about the relationship, that it's just, I have an enormous amount of respect for the man. And I think he respects what I've done for him, or what I've done with him.
Right.
I don't claim to have done really anything for him except help him, through the process, whatever it was that we happened to be doing.
Well, now you're really getting to help him. I mean, this is an extraordinary gesture. I assume this is obviously something you have had in your possession since Back to the Future Part 2. Mm-hmm. Let's talk a little bit about the making of that film. But first, I want to ask you about the decision to auction the hoverboard from Back to the Future Part 2, which is signed by Michael. It's signed by Bob Gale, the writer and producer of the film. This is, I assume, your way of giving back to Mike after what he's done for you in some way.
Yeah, I think so on our last day of filming Back to the flying stuff on let me go back a little bit.
Sure.
So when we began flying on the hoverboard, this one in particular, because this is the only one that we actually ever flew on, where you had your weight on the board and you could manipulate the board as you flew, much like you would on a skateboard. So I kept, and it was suspended from wires. It's actually piano wire that it was suspended from, which is a single strand wire, extremely susceptible to failure if it was mishandled in any way. So I kept the board with me every day. I would take the board home with me to make sure that, it wasn't just tossed into the special effects trailer or the prop trailer or whatever, to just ensure that this thing was, 100% okay. Everything's going to be, good. There's no damage to it, aside from what we did to it. But then, obviously you adjust accordingly. So I kept it every day. The last day of filming the flying, I thought, well, this is kind of a cool prop. Can I keep it? And Bob Gale said, yeah, no, you can have it. So I took it, and I've had it for 36 years, sitting on my shelf in my office. And, you get the occasional, I wondered a few years back, people would come over and visit, and everybody wanted to see the hoverboard and take a picture with it. And I thought, it's kind of a wonderful ego boost, having this thing that is such an iconic piece from the film. But it wasn't doing any good. It wasn't, it didn't mean it. I mean, it means something to me.
Right.
but it doesn't mean so much to me that I have to have this. You know, I started thinking, as the value of all these props and things has increased over the years, I thought, well, I'm gonna get it appraised and just see what it's all about, and the whole auction world and all of that. So I did. And then I discussed it with my kids. I have 3 kids, my wife. And I said, you know, the hoverboard, I understand everybody loves having the hoverboard here, and it's a great conversation piece and so on. But it isn't really doing us, you know, it's not doing any good.
Right.
So what's the point of having this thing sit on the shelf collecting dust? And Michael having, you know, you have to give Michael a lot of credit. He got Parkinson's disease. And instead of giving into it, he not only has fought the fight for, what has it been, 30, since we were on Doc Hollywood when he was first diagnosed with it.
And the foundation is 24 years old.
Yeah, he started a foundation to combat Parkinson's, to find out, how do I solve this problem? How do we get something done about it? And, you know, Mike's my friend. And I thought if there's anything I could do to help him, it would be to sell this board and donate it to his foundation. I can't, if I could have taken Parkinson's away from him, you know, much like Michael Clark Duncan in The Green Mile, I would have, but I can't. It's impossible. You know, there's nothing. So I went from, you know, making sure Mike never got hurt to watching Michael have to deal with this for years and years and years now, and really could have no impact on it in any way. And I thought, if the value of these things has gone up so much, maybe by selling it, and I donate the money to Mike's foundation, maybe that will help someone somewhere down the road to move ahead with, you know, his quest to solve this issue.
Does he know you're doing this?
He does. I texted him the other day and told him that I put the hoverboard up for auction, and that the money is going to, you know, at least 50% of the donation. I mean, at least 50% of the proceeds. If this thing went for some astronomical amount of money, I don't need much. I'm set. You know, I have a good life. I have a great family. I have pretty much everything that we need. So might as well give it to him.
Right.
You know,
I assume he was overjoyed. And did he try to talk you out of it?
No, he just texted back and said, "Good on you, Chuck." So, yeah. You know, we have a very easy relationship, and I just think it's important for me to do, you know, we all get older. As we get older, we start to reevaluate where we are and what's important. And I think this is one thing that I would hate for my life to end and not have done something, you know, the most I can possibly do to help him. You know?
It is all about perspective, isn't it?
It really is. It is. And I don't have, you know, I don't need it hanging on my wall or sitting on a shelf or anything else. If it's going to do, you know, there's so many millions of people that have Parkinson's, and I hear stories all the time. People come to me and talk to me about Parkinson's, their father, their grandfather, the mother, or their brother, or whomever it is. And it's a horrible, debilitating disease that it's a war that the poor people, you know, are dealing with on their own. So Mike's Foundation is an amazing organization that is trying to move the ball forward and try to make life easier for people. And if by, you know, donating the proceeds from this to that, it helps somebody, you know, I feel better.
Well, the amazing thing is the foundation's proceeds go directly to doctors who are combating Parkinson's, and that's what makes it all the more significant.
Yeah, Yeah, there's not a lot of loss of
Right.
the funds due to
You know where
whatever.
they're going.
Yeah, we know where they're going.
So when you look at that hoverboard, obviously we've talked about your relationship with Mike, talked a little bit about the making of the film, your history with him, starting with Back to the Future, starting with that skateboard scene in the first film, and then progressing to the hoverboard in the second film. When you look at that board as you begin to say farewell to it, I sort of wonder what your memories of it are, because it is, as you say, certainly a significant part of the beginning of your career, but then to be part of that franchise and then to evolve from that skateboard in the first film to the hoverboard in part two. I just sort of wonder when you think about that and how it sort of all came together and how it moved forward, what you think about.
Well, God, uh, being a part of those pictures early on in the beginning. I mean, I got to work with the best filmmakers in the industry, the best storytellers in the industry, and to go from skateboard to hoverboard. My emotional attachment to the hoverboard is we spend an enormous amount of time with it. It's like a little buddy, it's your board, it's the thing that you use you worked, I worked with him and all of the filmmakers to create this amazing story. And at the end of the day, what we accomplished on that board, I think back to it and go, we really pulled off some pretty cool stuff with that
Oh,
thing.
yeah.
And so I have been torn. I have to admit that I think to it, well, I won't have the hoverboard any longer, and but I have a picture of it, so
You have a whole movie of it.
I have a whole movie of it. Right. So it's um, you know th- I mean, it's hard to explain what those what Back to the Future meant, and my collaborations with Michael over the years, what that means to me. um like I said, Mike's my friend, and hang on one second. um I think it's important to help your friends, and I have a lot of great friends, but he made such a difference for me that my emotional attachment to an inanimate object means absolutely nothing.
Right.
To me. um, uh, I don't know how to finish this off.
Well, you have great memories of the making of that film. So let's talk. We'll backtrack a little bit and talk about how many days did it take to shoot that? Because I've watched some making of, and it certainly was a difficult process. And as I go back and watch it now, this being the pre CGI days, this being the when everything was still done in real time and in camera, it's a remarkable feat.
Well, it was the things that we had to do, because we didn't have CGI, because didn't have the ability to, we actually had to do it for real,
Right.
which is kind of gone by the wayside in many of the productions nowadays. We were really doing, and it was so cool. I mean, I can't tell you how cool it was. I'd show up there every morning, and we'd show up a couple of hours early every morning, because Bob Zemeckis would have a meeting with all the department heads, and talk about what we were going to do that day. And they involved me. I was just a stunt guy. That's all. At that time, I was just a young stunt guy, and he involved me in the entire process, in trying to determine how we're going to do this. What are we going to do? This is, he would say, this is what I need today. What do you think, Charlie? How are you going to pull this one off? And we worked together with the whole cast and crew. It was like a giant, big family. and that's, all of the projects that I've done with them. It's treated that way. It's, it was like, yeah, I was showing up to the best thing in the world every single day and having the time of my life doing it. And, as young as I was even, yeah, like I had gotten dropped into heaven, and every day was just absolutely great. No matter how hard it was, it didn't matter how hard it was. It was a challenge. And it was important to give Bob what Bob needed to tell his story.
Right.
So everybody worked, special effects, every department, props, everybody that was on the movie all worked together to figure out how do we get this particular shot. And that's where the enjoyment came from, is just being able to work together with such a talented group of people every single day. I don't even know how long it took us to shoot all of them, to be perfectly honest with you. It was a long time. We shot 2 and 3 back to back with a 2-week hiatus in between the two, but we didn't take that 2-week hiatus off. We went straight to Jamestown and started to prepare for the Western for 3. Right. It was like all of my work with that group and so many other filmmakers. I've been, if you can be blessed, I've been more than blessed. Again and again and again and again to have been allowed to, have such participation in the storytelling process. And the thing that I love more than anything else, I love it as much today as I did the first day I began pursuing it.
That means you don't work for a living.
I do not work for a living. I'd rather not call it work, because it's not, that's kind of a negative connotation. It's more fun. It really is. It's the most enjoyable thing I think I can do.
What was the most difficult part of shooting the hoverboard scene in Back to the Future 2? Because I've always imagined it was the over the water sequences, but maybe that's just my own naivete.
What was the most complicated or difficult piece? There really, I don't really look at any of the pieces. The water was interesting. We had an amazing crane operator it was amazing what this guy could do with a crane, a big giant construction crane that I'm hanging on the end of.
Right.
And he has to skip me, 3 inches off the water as we go, and I would assist, because I would be able to flex my body a little bit. And, right. And nothing struck me as being hard. It was a challenge, but it wasn't like, oh God, this is hell. It was never hell. It was just trying to figure it out mechanically, how this all had to come together. Then from a performance standpoint, what Bob wanted to see and needed to convey in this part of the story. And then just combining all of that together. It was an amazing process. I wouldn't even say it was a challenge. It was a great process. Bob, I have to go around the corner on the hoverboard. How am I going to make it look like I'm going around a corner on the hoverboard when I'm being swung by the end of a giant construction crane? So you have to work together with everyone and talk to the crane operator and go, this is what I'm planning. Let's try it slowly, and then we'll work up to full speed situation. So and you're constantly adjusting and just figuring things out. So I always loved mechanical engineering, so that kind of helped me through the process, because I understood it all. I understood how things work. I understood the physics behind it all. So I could incorporate that into my performance. I knew I could do these things. That wasn't the hard part. The performance was what was probably more difficult than anything. Just
See,
because
that you raise a really interesting point, and I hate to interrupt because but I want to get back to it because I've thought about this a lot over the last couple of minutes while you've been talking about this, because I think the thing we take for granted is the fact that it's not just doubling a guy to make sure he doesn't get hurt, but you have to emulate the actor's movements. You are sort of another actor in that scene, and I don't think that's a thing that we sort of understand. And I assume, because of your long-standing relationship with Mike, that is a thing that you take as importantly as the safety of the actor and the success of the scene.
That's right there with safety. When I didn't know who Mike was the first day I met him, but once I, started doubling him, I studied him. I would sit on set. Anytime he was there, I would watch him. There are little things that people do, little tics that people have, that tell us subconsciously that this, who this person is. You can see a guy walking down the street and go, oh, that's Michael J. Fox, because I recognize the way he walks.
Right.
So it was important that I move exactly as close to him as possible, as he did as possible. He holds his hands a certain way. He holds his fingers a certain way. When he's doing a thing, what's going through his head at that time? Is he scared here? Is he happy? Because that has an effect on my physicality, my body language. It has effect on his body language, which I then have to try to match. We're fortunate that we both move in very similar fashion. So it wasn't a real hard stretch to be able to match his movements, but it's important. I think it's more important than probably, the performance. That's what you're seeing from a stunt person. You're not seeing their face. You're not seeing, the same performance as the actor. You're just seeing their body. So my body had to say, I'm Michael J. Fox.
Right.
And I've done that with everyone I've doubled. And I tried to stress that to younger stunt guys that, you may be doubling this guy, but you have to look like this guy. If he's running down the road, or this girl, whomever it may be, if you're running down the road, you need to run down the road the same way he does. And it's not you any longer. It's him. That's who you are today. And I think that makes an enormous difference.
Right, because you're sort of surrendering yourself to somebody else in so many different ways. You're surrendering your safety, but you're surrendering who you are to mimic. And it's not even mimicking, right? You have to embody. You have to really sort of understand not just who they are, but why they do what they do. Yeah.
Yeah. And Mike and I always had a real shorthand on a lot of that. I understood him. I could see where he was. We hung out all the time, in between shots and whatever it was we were doing. So I kind of knew, just from hanging with him and talking to him, where his head was at, what his performance was going to be, what he intended to do. And then watching him do it, I understood, where he was mentally, how was he going to deal with this? And is he fearful of the situation, or, all that comes into play. Everything about the guy, everything about his mental state, his physical state, his intentions for that character at that time, in that moment in the story. I think that's really, really important, that when doubling somebody, you have to nail that. You have to strive to nail that every single time. So the more I studied him, the more I watched him prepare to, go through his scene, which would then lead up to a stunt, that I had to understand where he was at that moment in time, when all of a sudden, he's thrown out a window, or he's, hit by a car, or whatever it may be. I have to be him. I'm no longer me. And that's great. It's when you nail it, it's so cool. you just like, when people come up and go, oh my God, I had no idea that that was you doing that. You know, you look just like Mike.
Right.
I even had the producer come to me when we were doing The Hard Way. We were in New York. We had a giant billboard of Michael's head that we were climbing all over. And after having shot that whole thing, I was on it quite a bit, jumping down to a hand with a cigarette in it that's moving. And the day after they saw dailies, the producer came up to me and said, "We can't figure out who's you and who's Mike." I went, "They're great." Then I did my job.
That must be the best compliment in the world.
It is. It really was. And younger stunt people should do the same thing if they really want to be good.
I mean, sitting here for this time we have together, I feel like I'm just getting a master class in how to be a stunt person, how to be an actor, how to be a friend. I mean, it's a really amazing sort of symbiosis that takes place. Do you give a master class on this? This is great.
No, you know, when I have people working for me, I think it's important that I talk to them about whatever it is, that they understand what I understand. And 99% of the time they do understand that they have to be that person. But I do individually, we discuss everything that's taking place and why is it taking place and where is your actor's head at the time, or if you're performing as a character, where are you at the time? This has to be real. This has to fit within the story. I love stunts. I don't love stunts for stunt's sake. If a stunt fits within the story, or an action piece fits within the story, and nobody realizes that that was actually a stunt person doing that, or that was a stunt in the storyline, you know, that's the ideal situation for me, because you're so well integrated into the storyline that the audience doesn't realize. Nowadays, you know, everybody knows who stunt people are. When I started, nobody really knew who stunt people were. It was assumed that the actors did all of their own stuff, and that's good. You know, that's part of the, you know, the whole magic of film and story is that it's you know, that particular person doing that particular thing, and they're not disconnected from it by saying, "Oh, well, that was a stunt guy. I could tell because it was a stunt."
Right.
Where you know, if it all works well, everything works the way it should, you'd never have any idea.
Well, I got to tell you, I could sit here and talk to you for hours about this particular thing, but this is what you're doing is a wonderful thing. And it has been a true pleasure and delight to get to talk to you about all of this. Again, I could sit here for hours and hear you tell stories and talk about this process. But I guess I do want to end this by saying just one thing, which is good on you, Chuck.
Well, thank you, Robert. I appreciate your time.